Renegotiating or throwing out long-standing trade deals like NAFTA, forget even sitting down and then canceling negotiations with nuclear adversaries like North Korea, and forget about the midterms. The single event that will have the most impact on Donald Trump's legacy and shape the direction of the country for generations to come is happening this week. High-stakes confirmation hearings for President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. He is in the midst of a final day of prep before he sits down in the hot seat tomorrow. Republicans are confident the conservative judge will be able to lock in the votes to win confirmation. So confident so that Senator Lindsey Graham, he's even guessing the votes before the hearings even begin.
If he does well at the hearing, he will get, my belief is 55 or higher if he does well, and I'm sure he will do well.
But that is not going to come easy. Democrats are outraged that the Trump administration is withholding more than 100,000 pages of documents from Kavanaugh's past during his time at the White House working for George W. Bush.
This isn't normal. It's not normal because we are not able to see 100,000 documents that the archivist has just, because the administration has said we can't see them. They've exerted their executive power. 148,000 documents that I've seen that you cannot see because they won't allow us to make them public. So I can't even tell you about them right now on the show.
So where do things stand right now? Let's go live to CNN Abby Phillips. She's at the White House joining me right now. So Abby, what about these documents being withheld? What is the White House saying?
Well, Kate, in some ways, this is the political fight that we've been expecting and anticipating when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh. The reason this is an issue is because he does have tomes and tomes of documents from his past, serving in the Bush White House, but also as a judge on the bench. And so Democrats are saying these 100,000 documents could contain inklings of how Kavanaugh could rule when he's on the bench. The Trump administration is citing the presidential privacy and what they're calling constitutional privilege in holding back these documents. They worked with a Bush lawyer to determine which documents they didn't think ought to be revealed as part of this process. Democrats are crying foul because they believe that there could be information in there that could pertain to his confirmation hearing. But what we're hearing from the White House is that they're saying they've had shown some unprecedented transparency in this process. They're pointing to 440,000 documents that have already been released when it comes to Kavanaugh's background, and they're saying that they've already done quite a bit and that it shouldn't be unusual that some of the documents related to his time in the White House would be held back. Now, again, we knew this was coming, that Democrats had already talked about wanting more time to go through Kavanaugh's paper trail. So I think this is the fight that we were anticipating, and now as we're on the eve of these hearings, it's going to be louder and louder, these complaints that we're not getting enough information about Kavanaugh's background, Kate.
All right, Abby, let us see how it all goes. Great to see you. Thanks so much. Joining me right now to discuss and kind of lay the stakes at what we're talking about right now, Brian Fallon. He's executive director of Demand Justice. He's one of the groups leading the opposition to Kavanaugh's nomination. Thanks for coming in, Brian.
Thanks, Kate.
So you've got, Abby laid out what has been released. You've got 1 million pages from Kavanaugh's past. As White House attorney, as a federal judge, make the case that you need more.
Well, this process that will take place this week, Kate, is a sham before it even gets started. And really, you have to go back to how Kavanaugh was selected in the first place. This is really the first time that you've seen a Supreme Court nominee put forward after a president named explicit litmus test that he would apply in terms of who he was going to pick. Donald Trump was very clear. He'd only pick people that would overturn Roe. He wanted a judge that would gut the Affordable Care Act. And he used 2 conservative outside special interest groups to help him vet these candidates. And then when they settled on Brett Kavanaugh, it turned out that he had the longest paper trail of any nominee in Supreme Court history. Mitch McConnell even warned against Trump picking him for that reason. Trump ignored that advice and picked him anyway. And when it turned out that the archives said we weren't going to be able to produce all his materials until late October, Senate Republicans in the Trump White House said, we'll hold the hearing on September 4th anyway. And as a result, there's 3.5 million pages of documents that are being concealed that senators have not seen prior to this hearing getting underway. At this point, you have to sort of ask, what's the point of even Democrats showing up? If I were them, I'd consider walking out of the hearing tomorrow. You cannot act like this is business as usual. As Amy Klobuchar said in that clip that you just played, this is not normal. I think Democrats need to respond in kind. Otherwise, they risk lending legitimacy to a process that is fundamentally illegitimate.
I want to get to the idea of walking out or not showing up in just a second. But You talk about the paper trail and Kavanaugh's record. Here's what I'm hearing from Republicans is, what's the best way to gauge what kind of judge someone's going to be, Brian? It is looking at the 12 years that very someone has already been a judge. There's a lot of cases. That's a lot of a paper trail in and of itself. How is that not the best window into what kind of judge Kavanaugh's going to be?
Well, to some extent, I agree that if you look at his record as a judge, it tells you enough to oppose this nominee. For instance,
from the part of Democrats, maybe, but does that? But isn't that in and of itself negate the need for all of the outcry over more paper trails needed?
I'll give you an example, Kate. I think that in the one big abortion case that came before him, he basically sided with the Trump administration, Brett Kavanaugh did, in saying that a woman should be forced to continue to carry her pregnancy. So for us, on the side of those opposing Kavanaugh, that's a telltale indication that the litmus test is true, and that if Kavanaugh gets onto the court, he will be the fifth vote to overturn Roe. But in spite of that evidence of his judicial record, you have people like Susan Collins of Maine, who holds herself out to be pro-choice, but is saying, I'm not persuaded that he's anti-choice just based on that one case in his record. So we would like to see the documents. So this is the reason, Kate. So as a result, we would like to see the documents, because during the time that he was in this role in the Bush White House, they took several controversial positions regarding abortion, stem cell research, cutting off foreign aid to countries where abortion was allowed. So we might actually get more of a window into Brett Kavanaugh's views on this very issue that will determine Susan Collins' vote on a lifetime position for the Supreme Court. There's no reason why we should be rushing these hearings. The archive said by late October, they can turn these documents over. So why not wait for the archives and conduct this process in the same way it's been conducted for every Supreme Court nominee in the past? When Elena Kagan was nominated by Barack Obama.
Short answer I'll give to you is this: elections have consequences. Republicans are in charge of the majority in the Senate, and they get to plan the schedule. That is the short answer, and I know you know that very, very well.
That doesn't make it right.
Before we talk about Susan Collins and which way she might vote, what you had mentioned, that your suggestion is that Democrats should not show up, should walk out of the hearing. Let me play you what one of the Democrats on the committee, Amy Klobuchar, who you mentioned earlier, what she said about that idea yesterday. Listen.
Okay,
You've
that's
heard that.
Interesting. And you have incredible senators on there like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Dick Durbin, Mazie Hirono, Dick Blumenthal. And Diane, you name it, Chris Coons. I think it's much more powerful if we go in there and we ask the questions. Patrick Leahy, we need that opportunity to ask the questions. And if we just walked out, it would simply be one side asking the questions. So I don't think that's the way you examine a nominee and get the facts out.
Does she have a point?
Well, tomorrow, Tuesday, is the first day of the hearings. There's not going to be any questions asked of the nominee tomorrow. It's just going to be every senator on the committee droning on with 10-minute opening statements. And then finally, at the end of the day, we'll hear from Brett Kavanaugh for an opening statement. And then they'll adjourn and they won't ask any questions till Wednesday. So how about just walking out on Tuesday? I think the larger point that I'm trying to make,
so just walk out on Tuesday and then show up to ask questions on Wednesday?
Sure. I think the larger point is this. A Fox News poll, and I don't usually cite Fox News polls, but a Fox News poll came out last week and it showed that the majority of the public, not just Democratic voters, but a plurality of the public wants to see Democrats do everything they can to block this nominee. Senate Democrats need to show that this is not business as usual. I think walking out tomorrow would make quite a statement.
And Fox News polls, like a CNN poll, they are you can believe them as far as you believe polls. You can believe them, Brian, despite what you might say. Real quick, one final question: if a single Democrat votes in favor of Kavanaugh's confirmation, what do you think Democratic voters should do in return?
I think any Democrat that votes for Brett Kavanaugh is risking suppressing the historic level of enthusiasm we're seeing right now from Democratic voters. If you look at the polls, Brett Kavanaugh is the most unpopular nominee in the last 35 years. There's no reason why any red state Democrat should feel any political pressure whatsoever to have to support this nominee. He's historically unpopular.
Should Democratic voters not vote for a Democrat if they support Kavanaugh?
I think that the people that are out there knocking on doors and calling on the phones for voters and turning out the vote for these Democrats they're going to be less inclined to want to do those types of tasks that it's going to take to win in November if Democrats do not do everything they can to fight this nominee now.
Thanks for coming in, Brian.
Thanks, Kate.
Busy week ahead. All right, let's continue this right now. More perspective. CNN Supreme Court reporter Ariane DeVoe is here, and CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston. Some interesting perspective from Brian Fallon, and just a foretaste of the fight to come this week. Ariane, Supreme Court confirmations are always a battle, though. Is this one any different?
Here's why this one is different, and it's because of the seat
that Kavanaugh wants to take, and that's of Justice Anthony Kennedy. Remember Kennedy's key vote here. He was the swing vote on all those social issues, abortion rights, LGBT, affirmative action. Now that he's stepping down, and if Kavanaugh does get to step in, he is going to swing this court to the right solidly for decades. That's what makes this one different. And